Let's bring in CNN political commentators Maria Cardona and Alice Stewart. They're the hosts of the podcast Hot Mics from Left to Right. Maria, let's talk about Trump skipping, and Alice, let's talk about Trump skipping the debate once again in just a few moments. Because first we got to deal with what happened last night. Maria, what about last night?
Last night, I think what you saw was a watershed moment for Democrats that proved yet again that they are energized and mobilized, especially when it comes to pushing out the Biden agenda of protecting Americans' rights and freedoms over the MAGA extremist agenda of trying to take them away. You know, this happened in 2022 as well, Jim. We talked about it quite often, where there were so many polls that were pointing to this huge red wave that was going to completely get rid of any Democratic wins. And that just didn't happen. We had a great night in 2022. We had a great night last night. What happens is these national polls do not measure the energy, the enthusiasm, frankly, the anger behind what Republicans have done since the demise of Roe v. Wade, and frankly, what they continue to double down on, and telling women that they should be the ones that make decisions, the personal decisions about what to do with their bodies, their families, when they can and can't have a child. And American women and men and families all around the country, including a good sliver of Republicans, stood up and said, no, we're not going to let you do that. And that's going to happen going into 2024 as well.
Alice, what do you think? I mean, it seems like every time there's a state election somewhere around the country and abortion is the critical issue in the race, abortion rights activists are coming out on top. Should that give the Republican Party any pause?
It should, yes, and it seems like it because that's exactly what's happening. Every time abortion has been on the ballot, the abortion side has won. So what Republicans need to do is look at this as a rallying cry. Look, we fought for decades to overturn Roe v. Wade and put this back in the hands of the states. Now that it's in the hands of the states, we need to make sure and get the message to the people at that level that we need to reframe this conversation about abortion limits. What can we agree on as a limit to protecting the sanctity of life? And that's what needs to happen moving forward. We certainly need to make sure every state has the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. We need to find a viable ceiling for what is an acceptable time for an abortion. Nikki Haley, I think, has really hit the sweet spot on how to have this conversation, not to victimize and punish and demonize the mother who is seeking to have an abortion, but rather let's find where we can agree on a meaningful ceiling for having an abortion and move from there. And look, you know, there's no question this was a good night for Democrats, also in Virginia, taking over in the House and the Senate. And look, I also look at abortion was on the ballot and a success last night, but we also saw the power of incumbency. Look, in Kentucky, Governor Beshear has been a true servant leader for his state. He has helped the economy. He has helped with education, but he has also been there in times of crisis. When they had the mass shooting, he was there. When they had floodings and when they had tornadoes, he was there giving a hand and a heart to the people of his state, and they thanked him for that. We saw the same in Mississippi with Tate Reeves, who has been an effective leader with regard to education and the economy, and the voters came through for him.
Yeah, I mean, he beat an Elvis Presley relative. I mean, that's something to hang your hat on.
Exactly.
Maybe he's got some blue suede shoes. I don't know. But Alice, let me ask you this though, Alice, because you know Glenn Youngkin heading into last night's elections in Virginia was essentially saying if we win the House and the Senate in Virginia, we're going to do a 15-week abortion ban. And I just wonder if, you know, is he toast when it comes to this speculation that he might make a late entry into the race?
I think he is absolutely not toast, but I think he is just not toast for this time of this election in 2024. Look, Jim, I'm from Virginia, and I think Glenn Youngkin's been a tremendous governor. I think the way he ran his campaign for governor is the right way to do so. You adhere to our traditional conservative values, and you make this about policy and not personality, and you get away from the MAGA extremism and the toxic nature we had in Trump. And Glenn Youngkin not only ran and won on that, but he also recruited candidates that he felt would also go along that vein and help them with messaging. unfortunately, that brand of non-MAGA conservatism works for Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, but Virginia is a liberal state, and they chose more Democratic candidates. But as for what he can possibly do in the future, I think his future looks bright in politics. I would certainly think that sticking to what got him in the governor's mansion, education, the economy, and crime would be issues front and center, and making sure that abortion is not the what you lean on when you're appealing to independent voters in your state.
Might not be the best closing message. Maria, let me ask you this. A new CNN poll shows Trump leading Joe Biden 49% to just under that. I mean, it's a pretty close matchup there to 45%. Biden said last night in a statement that voters vote, polls don't. But these latest polls have just given Democrats the willies. And I know you're going to probably say, well, this just shows you shouldn't worry about these darn pesky polls. But I mean, I think at some point we have to acknowledge, like, the polls are making people nervous.
On the contrary, Jim, and I've said this on your show along with Alice many times, they should absolutely be nervous. I'm nervous. Okay. I'm losing sleep over these polls. But you know what? That's the only way we win. If you showed me a poll where Joe Biden is 20 points ahead, I would still say, let's be worried. Let's run like we're 20 points behind, because we cannot take anything for granted. This is an incredibly divided country. And frankly, I do
It seems like they did that in Virginia and Ohio, by the way, not to interrupt, but they, to what you're saying, Democrats did seem to wake up with like smelling salts or something in both of those states.
That's exactly right, Jim. That's a really good point. What I was going to say is, look, these polls are a snapshot in time of how voters feel at that very moment. So, as an example, when a pollster calls a voter, they might grab that voter, get that voter at a time when they just saw horrific images about the world on fire. They just had to pay all their bills and they can't make ends meet, and they're pissed off. And when a voter is pissed off, they blame the person in charge, and the person in charge is Joe Biden. But the fact of the matter is that that voter knows that answering that poll is not consequential. It is not a vote. It is not them filling out a ballot. When it comes to the moment of them filling out a ballot, we saw what happens. We saw what happened last night, and we have a year to make sure that we tell our coalition and independents and common sense Republicans what their vote, when it comes to the time of it being consequential at the ballot box, what that will mean. And that contrast between the Biden agenda and the extremist MAGA agenda that Trump will bring yet again, I think is one that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will win.
Alice, I kind of feel like this election cycle, this 2024 election cycle, is really weird because people are so burned out and they kind of don't want to deal with the national race, that they're really just souring on both Trump and Biden in these polls. But the thing that I find so strange about this campaign is that Donald Trump can keep skipping these debates. It's just the weirdest thing. He got the Republican Party to sign this pledge. They'll support him as the nominee, but he doesn't have to show up at the debates. And they have these debates without him. It's just so totally bizarre. Isn't it bizarre?
It is bizarre. Look, he skips the debates. He spends more time in the courtroom than on the campaign trail. He could face further indictments and even convictions, and people, his base will continue to stand by him. And not only that, he will continue his brand of insult politics, and it does not seem to affect him. We are back where we were in 2015 when he said I could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and I wouldn't lose any votes. And I don't understand it. I can't wrap my head around it, but that's where we are, because his voters and his base in the Republican primary believe he is the fighter for them. They look at him as a martyr. They look at him as someone who is fighting for them. The problem is that is great in a Republican primary, but when we get to a general election next November, that's not going to fly well with independent voters and the disaffected Republicans who are mad about that in 2020 and are still mad about it in 2024.
And Maria, to some extent, wasn't the Biden team kind of expecting these other Republican candidates to beat up on Trump during this stage of the race? And the fact that they just really have chickened out. I mean, they just have decided not to do this, which is just typically the normal thing you do every cycle. I mean, DeSantis has done it to some extent just in the last couple of weeks. And Nikki Haley does it from time to time. But Ramaswamy, I interviewed him the other day, and he's almost like the Trump campaign press secretary when he goes on TV. He will not say a negative thing about Donald Trump. It's just I don't know, understand it. It's just the weirdest thing. And I covered Donald Trump for 8 years now.
Yeah, no, it's completely bizarre. And I think the Republican Party would be in a much different position if all of these candidates had had the backbone that Chris Christie had and started going after Donald Trump from the get-go. But they all decided that they're going to, that they're afraid of his base. And so right now, what these debates are, it's not a debate for the presidential nomination for the GOP. It's a debate and it's a contest for who gets to be vice president or who wants their choice of cabinet positions if Trump becomes president. And so with that in mind, of course Trump is going to skip these debates because they do him no good and there's no harm if he doesn't go. And in fact, his numbers go up. I think that he's treating these trials where he is showing up, those are his debates for him, right? Those are where he is showing. Yeah, those are where he's showing his base. Look what I'm doing for you. I am going to be focused on the politics of vengeance and retribution, and I am your angel of vengeance. And that's working for him for his base. But to Alice's point, it's not going to work for him for independents going into 2024 and for common sense Americans who understand the massive danger to democracy that he poses to the country if he were to allowed into the Oval Office again.
Well, we'll talk about this on another time, maybe this weekend. But I do think that, to Alice's point, that this all hurts Trump and with independent voters and swing states and so on. But because of the electoral college system, I mean, Joe Biden could win by 10 million voters next time around, and it just has to be that tight in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. It doesn't have to be 306 to 270 or whatever it is. It could be, it could be like almost the flip of a coin. It could be right on the edge in terms of the electoral college. And then who knows what happens. I mean, Trump could definitely pull this out. I think that there's no question about that. Maria and Alice, thank you both.
And that fear is what's going to keep voters alive and will give Biden, I think, the edge. But that's correct, Jim.
Thank you so much. All right. Nice,
Thanks,
chunky
Jim.
segment this morning. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.